Section 1. The escaping fire. It happens quietly at first. A single ember snaps, leaps from the safety of a stone hearth. We are taught to repress it, manage it, confess it, and extinguish it as quickly as possible. Without it, evil would have the final word. A universe without a God capable of holy anger is a universe where the oppressor always wins. We can trust the fire of God precisely because of its target. It is never aimed at the weak. It is aimed at the forces that crush them. But this divine immune system was not meant to remain an abstract concept, thundering from the ancient heavens. What happens when that perfect justice takes on human flesh? What happens when the God of the prophets steps into a physical street, wearing a human face, and encounters a system designed to exploit the marginalized? When Jesus of Nazareth enters the temple, the fire returns, the sound of silver coins hitting the stone pavement, the smell of livestock mixed with burning incense, the shouting of merchants exchanging foreign currency. It is the week of Passover, and the outer courtyard of the temple in Jerusalem is deafening. This is the court of the Gentiles. By design, it is the only space on earth where outsiders, foreigners, and the marginalized are permitted to come and pray to the God of Israel. But on this day, they cannot pray. The religious leaders have transformed this sacred space of access into a noisy, chaotic marketplace of extortion. Into this chaos walks Jesus of Nazareth. We are familiar with the image. He does not offer a gentle, diplomatic rebuke. He makes a whip of cords. We assume that spiritual maturity means becoming numb to provocation, often confusing true peacemaking with a passive refusal to ever fight back. He overturns the heavy wooden tables of the money changers, scatters their coins across the floor, and drives the merchants and the livestock out of the courts. For many readers, this scene is unsettling. It looks like a sudden, explosive loss of temper. It looks exactly like the fire has escaped the hearth. But one brilliant detail in the Gospel of Mark completely changes the nature of the scene. Mark 11 tells us that Jesus actually arrived at the temple the evening before. He looked around at the corruption, saw exactly what the religious leaders were doing, and because it was already late, he simply turned around and left. He walked out of the city and went to Bethany. He slept on it. He returned the very next day to clear the courtyard. This was not a sudden emotional reflex. It was a calculated, premeditated act of divine justice. Jesus was proving exactly what it means to be long of breath. And look at the target of the fire. Jesus is not angry because someone insulted his ego. Like Cain, he is angry because the religious elite have built a financial and physical barrier between God and the vulnerable. They are financially exploiting the poor who have come to worship, and they are crowding out the marginalized from their rightful place of prayer. Jesus is acting as the divine immune system. The tables must be overturned because they are standing in the way of human flourishing. But when we look closely at the text of Scripture, a massive contradiction appears. The fire does not behave the way we were told. Step back and look at the architecture of this moment. Up to this point, the question has been historical. Now it becomes intensely personal. We often separate the anger of Jesus from his compassion, but they are inextricably linked. In the Gospel of Luke, as Jesus approaches this very city just days before, he looks out over the walls of Jerusalem and begins to weep violently. He weeps because the city has rejected peace. And he burns because the leaders have chosen exploitation. The tears in the flip tables come from the exact same heart. This is the defining mark of holy fire. Righteous anger does not seek to destroy people. It seeks to destroy the barriers that keep people from God. We often flip tables when our pride is inconvenienced. Jesus flips tables only when the vulnerable are blocked. That would be a comfortable place to leave the story. We could simply applaud the righteous anger of Jesus, pat ourselves on the back, and assume our own anger is always just as pure as his. But the story does not end there. Jesus also delivered the most terrifying warning about human anger in the entire Bible, and to hear it, we must leave the noisy stones of the temple and travel back in time to a quiet mountainside in Galilee. For many, the idea of an angry God is an embarrassment. It feels like a primitive Old Testament trait that Jesus came to abolish and apologize for. The air on the mountainside in Galilee is still. The crowds are seated on the grass. Listening to the rabbi from Nazareth reframe the entire moral architecture of the universe. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus begins to speak about the ancient laws of Israel, and suddenly, he addresses the crouching beast directly. "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder,'" Jesus says in Matthew 5. "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." At first glance, this statement feels like an impossible contradiction. If Jesus himself experiences anger, and if God's anger is the necessary immune system of a just universe, how can Jesus unconditionally condemn the emotion here? The answer is found in the very next sentence. Jesus gives a specific example of the kind of anger. He is describing, again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, "Raka," is answerable to the court. To understand the crisis of human anger, we have to understand this single ancient insult. Raka is an Aramaic term of abuse that carried over into the Greek text of Matthew's Gospel. It does not have a perfect English equivalent, but the basic meaning is empty or empty-headed. In the ancient world, it was not merely a casual curse word. It was an expression of profound, dismissive superiority. To look at someone and call them Raka was to declare them worthless. It meant, "You are a nobody." We prefer a deity of gentle, unconditional affirmation. Yet, if anger is simply a sin to be eradicated, "You have no value. You are completely beneath my dignity." This is the poison of contempt. Jesus equates this specific expression of anger with murder, and his logic is devastatingly clear. Murder is the physical elimination of a human being. Contempt is the psychological and spiritual elimination of a human being. When you harbor contempt, you strip away the image of God from the person standing in front of you. You no longer see them as a broken, human being in need of redemption. You see them as an object to be discarded. This is exactly where human anger crosses the line into spiritual death. Righteous anger, like the fire Jesus unleashed in the temple, attacks the barrier to save the person. Contempt attacks the person to elevate the self. When Jesus flipped the tables, he was defending the vulnerable. When we call someone Raka, we are making ourselves the absolute judge of their humanity. This is the deepest contradiction of our daily lives. We love to dress up our contempt and call it righteous anger. We watch cultural conflicts. We argue with our families. We suffer genuine wrongs. And we convince ourselves that our fury is holy. But if our fire ends with the conclusion that the other person is fundamentally worthless, we are not channeling the immune system of God. We have simply opened the door to the beast. Just like Cain, we have used our anger to eliminate our brother in our hearts. The opposite of righteous anger is not peace. It is contempt. But this creates an agonizing, practical problem. Why does the Bible repeatedly describe a God who exhibits fierce, uncompromising wrath? If anger is a spiritual failure, we live in a deeply broken world. We are going to experience genuine injustice. We are going to be betrayed, insulted, and harmed. If feeling the heat in our chest is biologically inevitable, and shutting off our emotions is not what God requires, yet slipping into contempt is a spiritual death sentence. How is a Christian actually supposed to process daily anger without sinning? To answer this, we have to look at a letter written by a man in chains. The Apostle Paul gives a shockingly practical mechanism for this exact problem. A Roman prison is cold, dark, and profoundly unjust. If anyone had the right to let the beast of rage consume them, it was the Apostle Paul. He had been beaten, falsely accused, and stripped of his freedom. Yet, from his confinement, he writes a letter to the young church in Ephesus and delivers a remarkably precise blueprint for how to handle the fire. In Ephesians chapter 4, Paul gives a command that directly echoes the warning God gave to Cain outside Eden. He writes, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil." Notice the structure of this verse. It is a command with three distinct movements. First, Paul says, "Be angry." The grammar here is an imperative. It is permission to feel the heat. Paul recognizes that in a fallen, broken world, encountering injustice, betrayal, why does Jesus, the perfect image of the invisible God, openly display intense anger? He does not quietly tolerate the exploitation in the temple, and cruelty should provoke a response. A failure to feel anger at evil is a failure to love properly. You do not have to apologize for the sudden flaring of the nostrils when a boundary is violently crossed. The alarm is supposed to sound. But then comes the second movement. Do not sin. Feel the fire. But do not invite the crouching beast through the door. Do not let the energy of defense twist into the poison of contempt. Do not weaponize the emotion to destroy the person who hurt you. How exactly do we do that? We are human, and our emotions are volatile. How do we keep the fire in the hearth when our pride is bleeding? This leads to Paul's third movement, the practical mechanism for daily survival. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Paul puts a strict, biological time limit on the emotion. He knows that anger is an adrenaline response. It is a sudden surge of energy designed for immediate, protective action. But the human body and the human soul were not designed to sustain that energy indefinitely. When anger is held overnight, when it is slept on, replayed in the mind, and nursed in the dark, it begins to undergo a dangerous chemical reaction. It ferments. It turns from a protective fire into a toxic, quiet bitterness. When Paul warns that holding on to anger gives an opportunity or foothold to the devil, he uses a spatial word. A foothold is a place of jurisdiction. He makes a whip of cords. He does not calmly accept the religious hypocrisy in the synagogue. It is a military beachhead. When you refuse to process your anger before the sun sets, you are handing over a piece of internal real estate to an outside force. You are allowing an enemy to set up a base of operations in your mind, from which it will slowly poison your relationships, your peace, and your faith. This is the key reveal. Anger is meant to be a temporary visitor, not a permanent resident in the human heart. It is a diagnostic alarm bell designed to wake you up to a problem. But you cannot live with the alarm bell ringing forever. You must acknowledge the trespass, set the necessary boundary, and then release the emotional demand for immediate vengeance to God. But this command brings us to a painful, lingering question. Releasing anger before sunset works perfectly for a stolen parking space, a frustrating argument with a spouse, or a misunderstanding at work. But what about the anger that cannot be resolved in a single afternoon? What happens to the fire when the abuse is systemic, when the betrayal destroys a family, or when the injustice results in death? You cannot simply go to sleep and pretend the damage is fixed. The fire still burns because the injustice is still real. If we cannot exact violent vengeance, and we cannot harbor quiet contempt, what are we supposed to do with the massive, unquenchable fire of deep trauma and worldly evil? For that, the fire must be absorbed by someone else. The Gospel of Mark tells us, he looked around at the Pharisees with deep, undeniable anger. When human injustice is massive, and the wound is too deep to heal by sunset, the fire does not simply evaporate. It has to go somewhere. The demand for justice is not a psychological illusion. It is a fundamental law of the universe. When someone is violently wronged, a debt is created, and someone must pay it. This is the ultimate crisis of the human condition. We demand absolute justice for the wrongs committed against us, but we desperately beg for mercy for the wrongs we have committed against others. If God simply sweeps the atrocities of human history under a cosmic rug and declares everything automatically forgiven, he is not a just judge. He is apathetic to the cries of the abused. But if God unleashes his perfect, unmitigated wrath against every act of cruelty, pride, and contempt, none of us survive. To solve this impossible tension, we have to look at a hill just outside the city walls of Jerusalem. It is a Friday afternoon. The sky is turning violently dark. The sound of a heavy hammer striking iron echoes over the limestone. A man is nailed to a rough wooden structure, struggling for breath. At the cross, the two great fires of the universe finally collide. Look first at the fire of human rage. Calvary is the ultimate manifestation of the crouching beast. It is human contempt taken to its absolute, terrifying limit. And perhaps most confusingly of all, why does the Apostle Paul write to the church in Ephesus and give them a direct command? Be angry? The religious leaders, the Roman soldiers, and the mocking crowds are all channeling their fear, pride, and hatred at a single, innocent target. They look at the Son of God and essentially say, Raka. They declare him worthless and eliminate him. But look closely at what Jesus does with that fire. He does not return it. As the blood runs into his eyes, he does not open his mouth to curse his enemies. He absorbs the full, unrestrained violence of human anger, and he suffocates it within his own physical body. He lets the beast strike, and he swallows its poison. But there is a second fire burning on that hill. It is the invisible, holy fire of divine justice. For centuries, God has been long of breath. He has patiently endured the violence, the oppression, and the systemic rebellion of humanity. But on the cross, the long breath is finally exhaled. The immune system of a perfect God activates. The full, terrifying weight of divine anger against human sin is poured out. But in the greatest reversal in history, God does not pour it out on the guilty. He pours it out on himself. Jesus steps into the center of the divine fire. He willingly becomes the target of the wrath that our contempt and our violence deserve, and lands on the dry, wooden floorboards of a dark room. For a few moments, it merely sits there, glowing faintly in the shadows. The problem is not that the biblical text is unclear. The problem is that we have misunderstood the nature of the fire. This changes everything about how we view the cross. The crucifixion is not an act of arbitrary punishment. It is God stepping onto the altar to absorb the horrific consequences of our evil. The cross proves that God takes injustice seriously enough to demand payment, and loves us deeply enough to pay it himself. When you have been profoundly wronged, and you feel the fire of vengeance burning in your chest, you do not have to pretend the damage does not matter. You do not have to minimize your trauma. It matters so much that the Son of God bled for it. You can release your demand for vengeance precisely because absolute justice has already been satisfied on the wood of the Roman cross. God has taken the fire. So, where does that leave our burning hearts today? What do we do with the embers that still glow inside of us? To answer that, we must return to the room where the fire first started. Let us zoom out and look at the entire landscape we have crossed. We have traced the fire from the long, patient breath of a holy God, to the murderous field of Cain, to the overturned tables in the temple, and finally, to the blood-stained wood of Calvary. Through it all, the central contrast remains clear. This is not ultimately a story about emotion management. The question is not how to stop feeling angry. The deeper question is what our anger is revealing about us. It is a story about what we love enough to protect. We have learned that anger is not the opposite of love. It is love's necessary boundary. A God who does not burn against the exploitation of his children is not a good father. But we have also seen that human anger is profoundly dangerous. Because we are broken, our fire is constantly poisoned by our own pride and the deadly sin of contempt. We weaponize our anger to destroy the people we were meant to redeem. So, we must return to the dark room. We must look again at the single ember snapping in the silence. At the beginning, we saw a fire that had leaped from the safety of a stone hearth onto the dry wooden floorboards, threatening to consume the entire house. For most of our lives, we believed our only two choices were to let the fire burn the house down in a destructive fit of rage, or to throw cold water on it and live in the freezing dark of apathy. But the cross reveals a third option. Look at the fire now. It has not been extinguished, but it is no longer burning the floorboards. It has been carefully gathered and placed onto a heavy stone altar. The boundaries of the stone contain the heat. This is not ultimately a story about emotion management. It is a story about what we love enough to protect. The fire is no longer a wild, crouching beast threatening to destroy the room. It is a controlled, purifying flame. It illuminates the shadows. It provides warmth for those shivering in the cold. It consumes the sacrifice, exactly as it was designed to do. This is what God wants to do with the fire you are carrying right now. Think about the deep frustrations you feel this week. Think about the relational conflicts in your home, the quiet agony of an old betrayal, or the profound sorrow you experience when you watch the vulnerable being crushed by systemic injustice. What are you doing with the heat rising in your chest? Are you opening the door to the beast? Using your anger to dismiss the humanity of those who have hurt you? Are you holding on to it overnight until it ferments into a toxic, silent bitterness? Or have you simply convinced yourself that spiritual maturity means becoming totally numb, turning a blind eye, and pretending the injustice does not matter? God does not ask you to stop caring. He does not ask you to apologize for the fact that your heart breaks and your nostrils flare over what is wrong in the world. He asks you to bring that raw, volatile energy to the altar. He asks you to let Him purify it. When you surrender your anger to God, He removes the deadly poison of contempt. He removes your desperate need to control the outcome. Anger, at its core, is the energy of defense. It is what flares up when something you value is threatened. If you love your own ego, He removes the exhausting, soul-crushing burden of exacting vengeance. But He does not extinguish your passion for justice. He redirects it. He takes your destructive rage and transforms it into a quiet, relentless courage. The courage to protect the vulnerable, to speak the truth without hatred, and to endure the pain of a broken world without becoming broken yourself. Your anger is not a curse to be hidden. It is a fire meant to be surrendered. Place it on the altar, and let God tend the flame. If this journey through Scripture has helped you understand the Bible more clearly, please consider subscribing and sharing this study with someone who might be carrying a heavy fire today. You will burn with rage when you are insulted. If you love justice, you will burn with rage when the vulnerable are crushed. The fire itself is a mechanism. Its goodness, or its evil, depends entirely on where it is directed and what it is allowed to consume. We must unlearn the idea that the goal of a faithful life is to never feel the heat of the flame. But to understand why God would command an emotion we spend our lives trying to suppress, we have to look back at the original language. We have to see how the ancient writers first described the human body in distress. How do you describe an invisible emotion before you have a modern vocabulary for psychology? In the ancient world, but soon, a thin line of smoke rises. The orange light creeps along the grain of the wood, feeding on the dry timber. You did not talk about internal states using abstract concepts. You described the physical body. You described exactly what the body was doing in a moment of distress. When the biblical writers wanted to talk about anger, they did not use a clinical term. They used a deeply sensory, physical image. In Hebrew, the primary word translated as anger is af. It is a simple, biological term. It literally means nose or nostrils. The standard English translation gives us the correct conceptual meaning, but it completely removes the physical picture the author intended. The original audience would have heard something intensely visceral. They observed that when a human being becomes violently furious, the biology of the body changes. The chest rises and falls. The heart rate accelerates. The breathing becomes rapid and shallow. The face flushes with heat, and the nostrils flare. To the ancient Hebrew mind, anger was not just a feeling locked in the brain. It was the hot, heavy breath rushing through the nose. To be angry was to have your nostrils burn. But the writers of Scripture did something fascinating with this word. They took this physical image of human rage and used it to contrast the God of Israel with the gods of the surrounding nations. If you lived in the ancient Near East, the gods you feared were incredibly volatile. The pagan deities of Babylon and Canaan were famously erratic. The heat intensifies, the crackling grows louder, and the smell of burning pine fills the air. In ancient mythologies, the gods threw floods and famine at humanity, simply because humans were too noisy and interrupted their divine sleep. Their anger was petty, unpredictable, and sudden. They had, in our modern phrasing, a very short fuse. You never knew when the fire would escape the hearth. But when the God of the Bible introduces himself to Moses in Exodus 34, he reveals his essential character. It is one of the most quoted verses in the entire Bible. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Look closely at the phrase, slow to anger. In Hebrew, the phrase is erik af. Literally, it means long of nose or long of breath. The text does not say that God is devoid of anger. It says his fuse is extraordinarily long. He takes a deep, slow, sustained breath before he acts. This changes how we read the entire Old Testament. God's anger is never a sudden, uncontrollable outburst. It is a long, delayed, and highly controlled response. When God's wrath finally appears in biblical history, it is never because he has lost his temper in a moment of petty frustration. It is because human rebellion, violence, and systemic exploitation have gone on for decades, sometimes centuries, and the long, patient breath has finally been exhaled. Within minutes, the very element that was meant to provide warmth and light to the house begins to entirely consume it. His anger is always tethered to his patience. It is an intentional response, not an emotional reflex. That explains why the word was chosen, but it creates a larger question. If God is long of breath, holding the fire in perfect restraint, what happens when humanity is quick to it? What happens when a human being, broken and defensive, feels the heat rising in their own chest without that divine containment? We do not have to wait long to find out. To see what human rage looks like in its most primitive, unrestricted form, we have to travel back to the very beginning. We have to look outside the gates of Eden. The story of the first murder begins not with a weapon, but with an emotion. It is a familiar scene just outside the closed gates of Eden. Two brothers, Cain and Abel, bring their offerings to God. Abel's sacrifice is accepted. Cain's is rejected. We are not told immediately what Cain is thinking, but the text shows us exactly what his body is doing. Genesis 4 tells us simply that Cain was very angry, and his face fell. There is the heat rising in the chest. There is the flaring of the nostrils. Cain is experiencing the overwhelming, blinding surge of human rejection, and it immediately turns to rage. This is how most of us experience human anger. It starts small, an overlooked comment, a deep injustice, a sudden betrayal, and before we know it, but what happens next is one of the most overlooked conversations in the entire Bible. We might expect a holy God to immediately condemn Cain for daring to feel angry in the divine presence. We might expect a swift punishment for his lack of emotional control. Instead, God steps into the heat of the moment and asks a diagnostic question. Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? God does not treat Cain's anger as a final moral failure. He treats it as a warning light. But then, God delivers a terrifying physical image. He says, "If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." Notice the architecture of this warning. God separates the emotion of anger from the entity of sin. Anger is the doorway. It is the vulnerable threshold where the internal house is open to the outside world. But sin is the beast crouching just outside that door, waiting in the shadows. The ancient Hebrew imagery of a crouching creature paints the picture of a wild animal, muscles coiled, preparing to strike its prey. The anger itself is not the beast. The anger is simply the volatile energy that the beast wants to harness. God tells Cain that he has a choice. He feels the fire, but he must master it He must stand at the door of his own heart. We feel the sudden rush of blood, the tightening of the chest, and the loss of rational control. The fire has escaped its boundaries and refused to let the crouching beast turn his emotional energy into destructive violence. This is the tragedy of human rage. Cain fails to master it. He does not ask himself why he is angry. He simply lets the beast inside. He weaponizes his anger, walks into a field, and murders his own brother. The fire escapes the hearth, and human history is stained with its first bloodshed. This event establishes the primary danger of human anger. When our ego is bruised, when our pride is wounded, our anger almost always invites the beast inside. Our fire consumes the people around us because we are trying to protect ourselves. Cain was not protecting the vulnerable. He was protecting his own fragile significance. Cain failed the test, and his failure echoes through every generation. We all know what it feels like to let the beast through the door. We all know how quickly our indignation can twist into a cruel, protective rage that wounds the people we love. But this forces a profound question. If human anger is so easily hijacked by pride, how do we distinguish between Cain's murderous rage and holy, righteous anger? How do we know if the fire burning in our chest is the beast of Genesis 4, or the holy response of a good God? We watch it burn down our relationships, scorch our own peace of mind, and leave nothing but ash and regret in its wake. The difference does not lie in the temperature of the flame. It lies entirely in the target of the fire. If you want to know whether a fire is good or evil, look closely at what it is burning. Cain's fire was aimed at an innocent brother, to protect his own pride. But when we turn the pages of the Old Testament and enter the writings of the prophets, the target of the fire dramatically shifts. For many modern readers, the prophetic books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Amos are profoundly uncomfortable to read. They are filled with terrifying, fiery language about the wrath of God. The smoke rises. The earth shakes. The divine anger pours out against kings, cities, and empires. Because we have been conditioned to view anger as a character flaw, we often read these passages and flinch. We assume God is simply throwing a cosmic tantrum because humanity refused to obey his arbitrary rules. But the problem is not the intensity of God's anger. The problem is that we have stopped reading the text too early, completely missing what triggered it. Read the prophet Amos. Look at the specific actions that caused the long, patient breath of God to finally exhale in fury. The fire does not fall because someone missed a religious ritual. The fire falls because the wealthy are selling the poor into debt slavery. Because of this terrifying, destructive power, the common assumption is simple: anger is a flaw. In many modern circles, anger is treated as inherently sinful. For the price of a pair of sandals, it falls because judges are taking bribes to crush the innocent. It falls because the vulnerable are being trampled into the dust, while the religious elites sing worship songs. Suddenly, the divine anger looks entirely different. It is not the petty rage of a pagan deity interrupted from his sleep. It is the fierce, a protective response of a father watching his children being abused. We want a God of pure, unconditional love. But we forget how love actually operates in a broken world. True love cannot remain neutral in the presence of evil. If you love a child, you will naturally hate the disease that threatens their life. If you love a community, you will naturally hate the corruption that starves it. If a person watches injustice, abuse, and exploitation destroy the vulnerable, and feels absolutely no anger, we do not call that person good. We call them apathetic. This is the profound truth hidden in the language of the prophets. God's anger is not the opposite of his love. It is the proof of it. His wrath is the immune system of a perfectly loving universe. Just as a healthy human body will instantly generate a fever to burn out a deadly virus, a holy God generates wrath to burn out the infection of injustice. His anger is always a defense of the vulnerable. It is a necessary, calculated reaction against the destruction of his creation.